Now we will go to the next part of our program, and this time we will call the various political parties to come forward and give us their solidarity message, and then follows the solidarity message from the NGOs. But before we go to this program, we have an important speaker, Mr. Untitled himself. Mr. Untitled does not need any introduction to the Eritreans. His name is almost a legend to all Eritreans. But I would like to give a short description of his life to the participants here who are not acquainted with his name. Untitled grew up actually in the parliament atmosphere, the first parliament atmosphere in Eritrea. His father was the prime minister or the leader of the government.
Delegates, ladies and gentlemen, permit me to thank the Social Democratic Party and the All of Parliament International Center for making this conference possible. The decision of the Eritrean government to hold elections in 2001 has been lauded by friends of democracy everywhere. It is in this spirit that the Parliament Center extended its arm of solidarity to us. Of Parliament, the name of one of the most shining beacons of democracy in our epoch, is a source of inspiration to us Eritreans and other small peoples throughout the world. Thank you again. The Transitional Parliament of Eritrea formally inaugurated the democratic phase by announcing elections of December 2001, the establishment of an election committee and another for party building augurs the introduction of a multi-party system in our country. As it turns out, these committees are composed exclusively of members of the ruling party. Yet, the saving grace for the one-party state in Eritrea lies in seizing this historical opportunity to pioneer a viable democratic system. The failure of the democratic enterprise is too grim to contemplate. The aim of this conference is to lay the pedagogical and organizational basis for the elections of December 2001. The issues that shall be crystallized in this conference are expected to lead to a mass movement directed at making the December election 2001 a resounding democratic success. Eritrean human resources have to be mobilized if war-devastated Eritrea is to be reclaimed from disaster. The imperatives of human resource development, the democratic project, and an open market cannot be expected to succeed when a large part of Eritrea, inhabited by a sizable part of the Eritrean population, is excluded from national participation on the grounds of so-called fifth columnist loyalty. The ambition of the ruling party to base its political legitimacy on the myth of the armed struggle. The rest is a matter
of political artistry. This serious omission leaves the formation of the parliament in the hands of the one-party state. The claim that the election of 2001 are being prepared in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution is simply not true. Nevertheless, despite our findings, it is incumbent upon Democrats to support the Constitution for two key reasons. The centrality of the principle of constitutional governance to any living democracy, and B, unlike sacred scripts, the amendability of constitutions. The immediate problem Eritrean Democrats are facing is not the quality or applicability of the Constitution, but rather the question of equitable participation in the preparatory organs of the election. It is at this level that the principle of historical compromise and democratic rule must be operational. The conference needs to examine this issue. The ruling party is expected to hold its fourth Congress in the near future for the ostensible purpose of assessing its performance. The resolutions passed in this Congress are to be touted as the official version of the events of the past decade. Party encyclicals, almost like the Pope, shall be issued in order to preempt other versions, with the purpose of declaring them illegal. The conference needs to examine this issue. The fact that the mass organizations are under the control of the ruling party is common knowledge. The question is, can we begin to speak of democratic elections when workers and professionals are under the control of the ruling party? The conference needs to examine this issue. All Eritrean political forces thus far, including the ruling party, define their objectives in terms of political documents known as charters. These documents are neither programs of action nor ideological guidelines. In fact, they are more promises of idealized societies than they are reflections of third world realities. Democratic elections require political programs with clear ideological lines. This element of the rules of the democratic game is one of the cardinal requirements for the qualification of contending parties. The pliable nature of charter politics encourages the formation of micro-political dams that isolate political forces from each other. Political currents need to merge into each other or diverge from each other on the basis of manifested programs, not charters. Movements with political programs can flow into each other, whereas alliance coalitions, prematurely created parties, might be obstacles to the establishment of large-scale parties capable of challenging the ruling party itself. This conference needs to examine this issue. In today's world, the establishment of democracy is one of the conditions for full-fledged membership in the international community. The war has caused immense suffering. Approximately one-third of the Eritrean population is displaced in one way or the other. The divide between undernourishment and starvation is quickly disappearing. As always, the victims are the very young and the aged. It is incumbent upon democratic forces to organize an infrastructure dedicated to the mobilization of aid on behalf of the dispossessed. The conference needs to examine this issue. The Stockholm conference needs to examine practical steps for the preparation of elections 2001. Distinguished guests, your continued support and encouragement is needed for making the elections 2001 a success, and thank you very much.
Please, Ms. Lisbeth Palmer, come to the floor and address.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear participants, I'm happy to be invited to the International Conference on Democracy in Eritrea. This is an opportunity for a commitment to and mobilization around ideas in order to create opportunities to realize them in a practical manner. The political dialogue, the meeting between people, is quite simple the basis for democracy. The right to speak and to let others speak, and the right to organize. My husband, Olof Palme, said, "To us, democracy is a question of human dignity. And human dignity, that is political freedom, is the right to freely express one's views, the right to criticize and to form public opinion. Human dignity is the right to health and work, education and social security." And he continued, "Human dignity is the right and the practical opportunity to form the future together with others. These rights, the rights of democracy, must not be reserved for a certain layer of society. They must be the property of all the people." My personal commitment mainly focuses on issues concerning children and young people, and lately particularly on the rights of children as defined by the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. The rights of the child must be seen in a general human rights perspective, the starting point being peace, in order for the child to be able to grow and to realize its life project, in the sense expressed by my husband, and I once again borrow his words. And he said, "During the course of life, we all meet the same challenges: to grow up and to be educated, to find playmates and friends, to prepare ourselves for different roles in adult life, to find a place in working life and to make our own living, to find somewhere to live and make a home, to form a family and bring up children, to keep healthy throughout life and to cope with illness and other misfortunes that may beset us, to secure a decent living and preserve our dignity for the inevitable frailty of old age, to live as free citizens, equal with other members of society, and to take a share in being responsible for common good." Once peace is secured, resources will be freed for the basic work of development of the Eritrean society. The schooling of children is a part of this work. It is of uttermost importance that all children are given the opportunity to start and complete their education, and that girls as well as boys are given the possibility to continue their studies after the basic level. One particularly important event in this connection is the recently added optional protocol to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, prohibiting recruitment of young people under the age of 18 into military forces. Earlier it was 15. This decision was taken in June year 2000 by the United Nations Commission for Human Rights, and this document is now open for ratification. This will greatly increase the protection of the young, but it will also influence society's attitude to war and peace in a wider sense. We must be aware of the fact that in all modern wars, civilian victims dominate. In war, children and adults are killed, injured, mutilated, and traumatized. Schools and health facilities are demolished, and the land is made unusable for crops. people become refugees within their own country or across borders. That is why it's of the uttermost importance that the democratic movement in Eritrea does everything in its power to support the peace agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia. At the same time, the work to secure peace in the future must be started, and in this work, the United Nations and the Organization of African Unity, AU, play important roles. It is also essential that the organizations for human rights establish themselves in Eritrea. Non-governmental organizations must in different ways contribute to the dynamic interplay in a domestic society, in a democratic society. Dear friends, dear participants, I wish you success in your work to continue the development of a democratic society in Eritrea. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mrs. Palme, other distinguished guests, it's an honor for me to be invited here, representing the Swedish Christian Democratic Party. I would like to thank, of course, the Olof Palme International Center and the Social Democratic Party for sponsoring this conference. Now, as I understand, there was a peace accord signed this week, this Tuesday. Often when you look on peace accords, I think it's important to distinguish between what is called a cold peace and a warm peace. Warm peace means living together, interacting in friendly relations. A cold peace would mean the absence of war, but still not really peace. I think it's important when you talk about peace that you talk about reconciliation. I often think of the conflict resolution method of the language of giraffes. One can divide people in between giraffes or wolves. If you're a giraffe, you have a warm heart and you always try to see how the other party thinks. If you're a wolf, you yell and you always try to find out what is right and what is wrong. Now, peace is not a question of right or wrong, but it's a question of finding a sustainable solution as acceptable for all people. Peace is also having respect for human rights and building a democracy. Now, as I understand, as we heard before, there has been announced a multi-party system in Eritrea, or at least there will be elections next year. Now, true democracy is not only having elections and democracy once every 4 years, for example. A democracy demands a democratic behavior which runs through the whole society. You have political parties, you have NGOs, and as Mrs. Palme said, you have a strong civil society. Now, if we look just very shortly on the political parties, I think it's important also to talk about intra-democracy within political parties. Now, we do not want, if we talk about a multi-party system, we do not want political parties which only have a strong leader, for example. We want democratic procedures within the parties. We want local branches within the parties, and perhaps youth forums, women forums, and perhaps, as we have in the Christian Democratic Party, a senior forum. If we have truly democratic political parties, then perhaps we are on our way towards a democratic society. Now, I hope, and perhaps this is why the political parties here in Sweden has been invited to this conference, I really hope that all the political parties in Sweden can help in solidarity with future political parties in Eritrea to help with our solidarity. And we can perhaps learn from our experience, but especially important is, of course, to do this in partnership. Now, in our Christian Democratic Party, we have a Council for Democracy and Development. And I would like to give the word now to Mrs. Josephine Claesson. She's a friend and a colleague of mine who represent the Council of Democracy and Development, just to say a few words of what we actually do in that council. Thank you very much once again.
I'm, of course, too very honored to be here today. And as Christopher already said, I'm here as a representative for the Council for Democracy and Development. And this is a council that the Christian Democratic Party started when SIDA decided to finance, to give some support to all parliamentary parties to promote democracy and multi-party systems in developing countries and in Central and Eastern Europe. So far, we don't have any work going on in Eritrea, but who knows? Maybe we'll be there in the future. And I think there has been so much said already about democracy and multi-party system, and I can only say that I agree with what you all have said already. So I'll just keep this very short, and if you like, if we get a coffee break later, I'll just bring out my cards and maybe we can keep in touch for the future. Thank you so much.
Yes, dear friends, I'm very glad to be here. My name is also Lennart Brunander, and I from the Center Party in Sweden, and we are very interested about what's happening in Eritrea and this part of Africa. But I must say the same that the first speaker, it has to be better to take it in Swedish, but I try to take it in English. Democracy is what the speaker before me has said, the ground for a good living for people, for the Eritrean people and for other people, and also the ground for peace. The first time I was in Eritrea, it was 1962. And I must say, it's a very beautiful country, and also very beautiful people. I like Eritrea and the people. But in that time, the people was not really happy. You were not independent. You don't want to be part of Ethiopia. You want to be independent. At that time, like now. And so it was gone many years before I was in Eritrea next time. It was 1992 with you, and it was a really good time, but of course it was not the same. After the war, many things was different. I was in Massawa 1962 and was there also 1992, and I say Massawa was a very beautiful place, but 1992 I think all houses was broken in any way. It's different now, I think. I've never been there after that. But I was also very glad when I speak with the leader of the Eritrean people that time. You has had a long war between in Ethiopia and Eritrea against Mengistu. And the leader said, we didn't have a fight between Ethiopian and Eritrean. We have a fight against Mengistu. So we have to live in peace with the Ethiopian people and Eritrean people. We know that all things has not go that way whole time, but we hope the future will be like that. And democracy in Eritrea and other countries in Africa is the way to make it. So from the Center Party in Sweden, I can also say that when I was in Ethiopia and Eritrea in 1962, was the start for the Center Party's work in that part of Africa. And so for this reason we know something about it, and like to do something to make democracy and peace in Eritrea. So I want to say, wish you a good luck with the election and to make democracy. And the way to make democracy is what Mr. Palme, on the other hand, said you have to have more than one party. I can give you one example to how it is. I was in Zambia for a few weeks ago, and we was living. I was there for the Center Party in Sweden, and we meet opposition party in Zambia, and we was living on the Swedish embassy with Kristina Svensson. And when we speak to the people in Zambia, they don't understand that we, at I and my partner for Center Party, can live on the Swedish embassy because we was not Socialdemokrat. But I say, this is the ground for the democracy. We can have different opinions in things, but we respect each other. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Mrs. Palme, dear friends, Cooperation, that is wrongly written in the program, Cooperation utan gränser, in English Swedish Cooperative Center, has been called upon to make a contribution to, on this occasion, discussing democracy in Eritrea. One should always be careful talking on things like democracy. Thus, I will restrict myself to some short comments on the role of the NGO development connected to the history of democratic development in Sweden, what we in Swedish call folkrörelser. Swedish Cooperative Center was started in 1958 by 8 national cooperative organizations, the consumer cooperatives, KF, the farmers movement, LRF, 2 housing cooperative organizations, HSB and Riksbyggen, the cooperative insurance, Folksam, the then cooperative bank Föreningsbanken, which is today merged into Föreningssparbanken, the oil consumers, OK, and the consumer guilds, Konsumentgillesförbundet. Today the membership is actually, in the paper it said 18, but yesterday we had a board meeting approving 1 more member and 3 on the hold to provide some additional information. These new ones are mainly regional organizations belonging to the national unions, joining as members on their own. Many of the founder organizations have a long history, some of them more than 100 years. They have, in our opinion, in many cases played a significant role in the development of a democratic society in Sweden. Many of the Swedish cooperative initiatives originally started as very small ventures, like forming a feeder road association, a telephone cooperative, a small savings and credit association, etc. They very closely involved people at grassroots level to work together, make joint decisions, the very essence of a true democratic development. At an early stage, another typical Swedish phenomena started, the study circle method. That is also connected to democratic development, since the participants, at the same time as they together learn about the technical subject, will train themselves in participatory methods by all giving their inputs to the process. Do cooperatives have a role to play? Should cooperatives play a role? Can cooperatives play a role? Our answer is definitely yes to all the 3 questions, but then they must also be connected to the development of truly democratic, self-governing entities with a clear vision of establishing long-term, sustainable, vigorous organizations. It is fair enough to talk about social responsibility and caring for others, but it must also be connected to economically sound business practices to make it sustainable in the long run. Thus, we see ourselves involved in a joint effort together with our partner organizations in developing countries and their members to, through participatory methods, trying to initiate a democratic development from grassroots level upwards in the society. With these comments, We wish you all the best continuation of this meeting and for the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dear participants, I would like to start out thanking for the kind invitation to come here. Thank Mr. Tseggay and his colleagues for organizing this conference. I would like to express International IDEA's full support for the process of democratization that you are all helping to carry through in Eritrea. And sticking to the time frame, I would like to only shortly tell you a bit about the work that we do and the publications that you might have use of in your work. Quoting Dr. Kuras, I would like to say that much has to be done before the elections can be carried out in December 2001 as has been planned. And he also said that the Constitution cannot be considered in force without an electoral law. And in this respect, I hope that you can have use of this publication from International IDEA on electoral systems design, where you can see how other countries in the world has chosen to organize their elections and the pros and cons of the different systems. Other projects that we have at International IDEA that I think can be useful to you is a project on women in politics, which also has got a handbook here. Another project on involving youth in democracy, and a project on the functioning and funding of political parties, which has also been mentioned here today, the importance of a multi-party democracy. And I will not talk to you further about this, but please contact me on our coffee breaks if you're interested in the project or on the overall work of International IDEA. So I wish you the best of luck and success in your work on democratization in Eritrea, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I want to tell you that I found even Massawa as a wonderful town, but the journey to come there wasn't that very good because of those slopes. First of all, I want to welcome those of you who come from other countries. Warm welcome to Sweden. And I also want to say that it is a big honor for the Social Democratic Party and the Olof Palme International Center to have the opportunity to support your conference here. And I also want to bring greetings from both the party and Olof Palme Center. None of them have the opportunity to come here because of different things. But the board of the party is have their meeting today. We think it's very important to take part in the conference, both because that we work with questions about democracy also in Sweden. We have had a democratic system for not 100 years, but 80 years. But it isn't ready yet. Maybe in some areas it's more than ready. It's begin to sleep, and we have to waken it up again. When a system is old, that is a risk. But we are also convinced that our democracy can't be strong enough if the world outside Sweden isn't democratic. Because we think that democracy is one of the cornerstones for peace and development. And if the world isn't safe outside Sweden, it isn't safe for us too. I have, as Roy said, I have followed Eritrea and development in Eritrea since 30 years, both through Heroi and Heroi's father and his family, but also when I have traveled in Eritrea. And I must say that it is a fantastic country. I feel I have traveled in some other countries in Africa too. And when I come to Eritrea, I found something. I can't give you the answer in what it is, but I found something which gave me the feeling to be at home. And I think that's the reason why the Swedish people and the Eritrean people have rather easy to speak with each other. We have an understanding for each other. There are something which is rather similar. Of course, there are a lot of things that are quite different too. The independence from Ethiopia was the first step to come to a better situation in Eritrea. And I'm very glad to notice that maybe Eritrea is going to take the next step now. And that's the multi-party system, the election, the opportunity for the Eritrean people, each of them, to be a part of the democracy, the opportunity to choose their own future, to choose their own leaders. And I think it is the same situation in many countries in Africa, that there are lack of a political culture with a multi-party system, that way to solve conflicts and to make the opportunity for progress through a dialogue, internal in the own country and with neighbors and other countries. So that's a very, very important step. But it isn't just a question about election, and you know it better than me. It is also a question about to make real chances for all people to take part of it. And it's a question about education. And the chairman mentioned the education system in Sweden, and just by it happened that my eyes followed at a booklet just when I rushed from my room this morning about democracy in Swedish education, and that it is in English, and I left it here so you can look at it when you want to. To stop with, I want to say something about what I think about Eritrea's role in the region, in your region in Africa. If the region, Africa's Horn, should be able to develop, you need peace, of course, but not just peace. I think you also need a cooperation with the neighbors.
Bedrövelsen över då de spillda människoliv som vi fick har varit, fick vi glädjande besked under tisdagen ifrån Algeriet. Det är dock ett ansvarsfullt besked som kräver tribut av oss som jobbar med Eritrea som bas. Under oktober månad aviserade den eritreanska regeringen ett datum för att hålla nationella val. Det tillsammans med det avtal som slöts i tisdags är ett hopp om att förvandlas till en konstitutionell och representativ demokrati för Eritrea. Hur som helst, mötesdeltagaren, är inte detta en Guds gåva, så är det åtminstone en oreserverad rätt som också ska tillfalla de 3,5 miljoner människor i Eritrea som inte har upplevt någonting annat än ständig kamp för sin överlevnad. För oss anhängare av demokrati är det förstås viktigt att demokratin som är det bästa och mest eftersträvansvärda styrelseskiktet, får fotfäste i Eritrea. Demokratin för oss innebär ett vidare direkt demokrati där människors, medborgares direkta deltagande i samhället är överordnat. I den universella demokratin är det viktiga beslut om krig och fred, de offentliga finanserna, val av de förtroendevalda och så vidare som ska fattas av en folkförsamling. I denna folkförsamling ska de olika åsikterna som finns representerade i ett land mötas, delta och utforma policies. Vi hoppas verkligen att den aviserade demokratiseringsprocessen fortgår utan smärre politiska undanflykter. Om inte så finns det risk att Eritreas anseende återigen markant försämras efter att ha blivit mycket bättre i de internationella sammanhangen. För övrigt hoppas jag att det aviserade valet uppfyller demokratins grundfundament, där ord som rättvisa och opartiskhet är lovord och ledord som måste vara vägledande i processen. Med detta vill vi i Ideologiskt forum önska demokrati och progressivitet åt det eritreanska folket och hoppas att vi tillsammans med det socialdemokratiska partiet kan ta en aktiv roll i utvecklingen av demokrati i Eritrea. Tack.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subject matter under discussion is some observations about the Eritrean constitution. The announcement of elections in December 2001 is an important milepost that the Eritrean people must take full advantage of. We need to keep in mind that the unfurling of the democratic phase is the accumulated result of struggle by countless Eritreans and not a mere act of generosity on the part of the government. The principle of self-determination does not stop with the achievement of national independence. National sovereignty is in fact nothing other than an encasement for good government. With the independence of our country, we also earn the right to form a democratic national government. The time has come to exercise this right fully. So far, we in Eritrea have not been governed constitutionally. Nevertheless, the totalitarian nature of the one-party state should never be an excuse for taking the path of armed struggle. Every ounce of Eritrean resourcefulness must be directed at establishing a democratic system. Towards this end, I shall attempt to make some critical observations about the Eritrean constitution as a further contribution to the democratic debate. I shall compare the contents of relevant texts of the constitution to Dr. Berhe Habtesillase's article written for the North Carolina Journal of International Law and Commercial Regulation, Volume 24, Winter 1999, number 2, in order to better understand this primary document in Eritrean political life. An attempt shall be made to reach a certain level of analytical competence by focusing on a limited number of questions. I would like to point out that the tentative observations that have been formulated in this article do not in any way reflect upon the personal dignity or the established intellectual status of Dr. Berhe. So my first question then is, does the Eritrean constitution provide for political parties? The Eritrean constitution does not provide for political parties. The constitution has the following provisions that stand in lieu of political parties or instead of political parties.
The first provision, Article 19(6), reads, every citizen shall have the right to form organizations for political, social, economic, and cultural ends, and to practice any profession or engage in any occupation or trade. The second provision, located in Article 7(1), reads, it is a fundamental principle of the state to guarantee its citizens broad and active participation in all political, economic, social, and cultural life of the country. In the same Article 5, it is provided that the organization and operation of all political and public associations and movements shall be guided by the principle of national unity and democracy. The letter and spirit of constitutions, all constitutions, are captured by clarity of language. Constitutions which are not clear in their language can hardly be considered constitutions. It is upon such clarity that the multi-level relations of the state to society, the individual to society, the individuals of society to each other, and other state-society computations are ordered. In none of the quoted articles is it stated beyond reasonable doubt that the Constitution shall base Eritrea's political system on a multi-party democracy. The relevant articles use terms such as organization, association, and movements. It is true to say that associations, movements, and organizations share some characteristics with political parties, but by no stretch of imagination can they be depicted to mean political parties. The articulators of the ruling party retort, this is the way we interpret the Constitution, take it or leave it. Such an attitude says more of political muscle than constitutional commitment. Those versed in dialectics attempt to imitate the illustrious tradition of American constitutional scholars of resorting to the writings of and utterances of the fathers of the American Constitution whenever differences of interpretation arise. The only document ratified by the Transitional Parliament was the Eritrean Constitution. Other documents are a matter of historical curiosity. It is comforting to know that the authors of the Constitution and those who participated in the process of constitution making are here with us to witness the truth that the multi-party system was deliberately rejected. Let us now examine whether the Constitution was written to accommodate more than one party in the Parliament. What does the centerpiece of the Eritrean Constitution, namely the National Assembly, have in store for us? Now let's look at Article 32, number 8. It reads, the National Assembly shall have the power to elect from among its members by absolute majority vote of all its members the President who shall serve for 5 years. Article 34, number 1 reads, in its first meeting, the National Assembly shall elect by an absolute majority vote of all its members a chairman for 5 years. Sub-Article 3 states, the chairman of the National Assembly may be replaced by an absolute majority vote of all members of the National Assembly. Now let us also make a parallel examination of the stated theme in Dr. Barakatab's article. I quote, a word of explanation of the phrase, a majority of those present and voting, is in order. It is sometimes called a simple or relative majority. It must be distinguished from the absolute majority that is required by the Constitution. For example, for the election of the President. This is in page 13. He also states that an exception to the relative majority rule, as noted before, the absolute majority rule, which requires the presence of all members. Again, page 13. The text of the Constitution and the clarification provided by Dr. Berhe affirm beyond doubt that the principle of absolute majority in the election of the President and the Chairman of the Assembly, in the presence of the absolute majority of its members, means that only one party is represented in the Parliament. The comparison of the quoted texts are incontrovertible evidence of the decision made by the framers of the Constitution. The People's Front for Democracy and Justice, PFDJ, considers rapid economic growth to be a prerequisite for democracy. The PFDJ leadership is fearful that a multi-party system might adversely affect the goal of rapid growth, as well as the stability required for such growth and for good governance in general. The implication is that it will be quite a while before the country will have multiple parties, and that consequently Parliament will be solely or predominantly composed of members of the governing party for the foreseeable future. Given Eritrea's historical circumstance, the logic of PFDJ's policy of rapid economic growth is irresistible. This is a quotation on page 3. B. For which parliament is the Eritrean constitution written? Article 30, number 2 states, the National Assembly shall enact an electoral law which shall prescribe for and ensure the representation and participation of the Eritrean people. Article 31.6 states further, the qualification and election of the members of the National Assembly and the conditions for vacating their seats shall be determined by law. Article 57, number 1 also states, there shall be established an electoral commission operating independently without interference, which shall, on the basis of the electoral law, ensure the free and fair elections, that free and fair elections are held and manage their implementation. Decide on issues raised in the course of the electoral process and formulate and implement civic educational programs relating to elections and other democratic procedures. The 3 articles quoted above provide for future elections, but not for the elections of the announced parliament. The truth that the 2001 elections are being prepared solely by the ruling party in the absence of a constitutional electoral law has to be hammered relentlessly. Dr. Berhe provides the following explanation about this odd constitutional matter. The Constitutional Commission, he says, left the choice of electoral system to be determined by legislation. It nonetheless debated the issue at length. In the course of this debate, it was pointed out that PR assumes the existence of several parties, which is not the case in Eritrea at the moment. Future legislation can adjust the rules and demands, including the need to enable proper representation for small parties. The material we examined demonstrates clearly that the Commission for the Constitution of Eritrea forfeited the right as well as the duty to stipulate electoral laws, and thus surrendered the formation of the national parliament as a legislative and not a constitutional matter in the hands of the ruling party. C. Is the Eritrean constitution a compromise between the presidential and the prime ministerial system? Dr. Berhe claims that the Eritrean constitutional system, which is a compromise system, uniquely combining aspects of the presidential and parliamentary systems, page 12. It cannot be underlined sufficiently that parliamentary democracy is composed of more than one party. In a situation where one party dominates the parliament as it is ratified in the Eritrean parliament, parliamentary democracy is certain to die at its inception. It is equally important to point out that a parliament that elects the same person as president of the state and the chairman of the parliament by an absolute majority can only be described as totalitarian. What we are dealing with here is not a compromise between the parliamentary and the presidential systems, but a dictatorial parliament akin to the Chinese People's Assembly model, and not to a compromise between the presidential and prime ministerial, or even the French parliament. In a parliamentary democracy, the leader of a majority party becomes the prime minister and forms his government by selecting his cabinet from the parliamentary party. In the presidential system, however, the elections to the presidency and to the legislative are separate and mutually exclusive in their functions. In the presidential system, the president is directly elected by the electorate with the support of his party and selects his cabinet outside the legislative body. In the Eritrean constitution, both the presidential and prime ministerial systems are non-existent. The Eritrean single-party parliament is dominated by one party that is itself devoid of internal party democracy. The president of the state of Eritrea is also the chairman of the parliament. In the end, what we find is not a compromise, but the makings of constitutional despotism. D. Is the principle of separation of powers embodied in the Eritrean constitution? The answer is no. The Eritrean constitution does not provide for the separation of powers. The executive branch appropriates the power of the parliament by virtue of its monopoly of expertise in drafting bills, as well as greater resources and the instrumentality of delicate legislation. It is unthinkable to reject the drafts of the executive. Page 10. Dr. Berhe describes the powers of the executive parliament president as follows. In Eritrea, which is a parliamentary system with an executive president, a draft law passed by the parliament cannot be questioned or returned for review, but must be published as law. This is a constitutional requirement. However, in the vast majority of cases, it is the executive, meaning the president, that proposes laws to be enacted by the legislature. Parliament may take the initiative in passing laws on almost any subject. However, in practice, it is the executive branch of the government often takes such initiatives. Page 11. Via the enabling clause, the Parliament surrenders its legislative authority to the executive. It is in the establishment of these details that the executive, in effect, makes law. The absence of the separation of powers is inbuilt in the concept of the Parliament conceived as governmental authority, out of which all political power is born. Let us imagine the ruling party as a river, which flows into an artificial lake, the Parliament, out of which would then the three branches of the government are canalized. What results from this imagery is not the separation of powers, but the separation of errands for a powerful executive. F. What are the theoretical underpinnings of the Eritrean constitution? Three major currents of thought are identifiable in the two documents we examined. The first of these is the notion that a war-devastated Eritrea is in need of strong guidance in the form of a parliament dominated by one party. It was also presumed that this state of things would continue as long as the economy kept improving. For this reason, a powerful parliament endowed with governmental authority was envisaged. Dr. Berhe argues that the addition of representatives to democracy makes members of the parliament, page 4, representatives of the whole nation, page 10. Conceived in this manner, the parliament becomes the fount of collective political authority. The fact that the members are elected directly by the people adduces to the democratic idea, to their collective or corporate personality, and thereby vests them with governmental authority. It appears that the first current of thought is lodged in the strategy of degrading the electoral laws from a constitutional status to that of a legislative one. By such a device, the framers of the Constitution granted the ruling party the opportunity to shape the first parliament in its image. It is true to say that the provisions of Article 57 open the possibility of legislating electoral laws to the single party. Even laymen can detect that this act is no more than a gesture. Again, the central issue of electoral laws was left open to the ruling party. Dr. Berhe has the following to say regarding the one-party parliament, which represents the second current of thought. Eritrea's venture into constitutional government may be marked for a few years by the operation of a single dominant party. I am quoting. There will be nonetheless expectations or even demands for multi-party democracy. Much will depend on the operation of a number of factors, prominent among which is the performance of the Eritrean economy. If the economy's performance is satisfactory, providing optimal employment and other benefits to the people, it could induce a degree of complacency, postponing demands for multi-party representation. In this novel conceptualization of the parliament, and in the absence of official opposition parties, the burden of guarding civil freedoms and encouraging the country's economic growth and social progress falls on the parliament's shoulders. Page 15. Dr. Berhe concedes, however, that even if a multi-party system is an obstacle to rapid economic growth in the short run, one would nonetheless need a quantum leap of faith to believe that a single-party regime will bring about prosperity. Page 3. He also confirms his reservations by adding, whatever the circumstances that may extenuate the postponement of multi-parties, there must be a time frame within which a single-party system may give way to a multi-party system. Page 3. The basis of the third current of thought can be summarized as follows. After 2 5-year periods, when the present leadership is expected to surrender to old age, the authors of the Constitution envisage the single party giving way to a multi-party system at the third parliamentary period. The observations made above are motivated by the need to cultivate an interest in our Constitution. Those who attempt to castigate the Eritrean Constitution blindly can only be described as friends of despotism. Constitutions thrive on critical appraisals and amendments. Let it never be forgotten that the moment the Eritrean people lose sight of their constitutional rights, they shall also squander their democratic rights. Thank you.
ناكل فيتامين نحل نحيلي ناكل معدة نحل نحيلي صفوق زي ملكعة كفاتا وقتلي صفوق زي ملكعة كفاتا وقتلي سبعين سبايتي نجزانا هزبي سبعين سبايتي نجزانا هزبي كله فتاوية والعايب والعابي كله فتاوية والعايب والعابي قريت تموق زيت من نبقبي زيت من نبقبي ناكل فيتامين نحل نحيلي ناكل معدة نحل نحيلي صفوق زي ملكعة كفاتا وقتلي صفوق زي ملكعة كفاتا وقتلي